last 2 Wednesday nights and did a fantastic job. And thank you to all of you who have been here supporting. It blesses a pastor's heart when you can be gone and people still show up. That's wonderful. So thank you for showing up and for being plugged in and connected to what's going on. We're in Acts chapter 22. Finished up last week, Acts 21, and you see what's taking place. Paul is being essentially taken into custody. The Jews don't like what he's preaching. He's gone to Jerusalem. They've told him, don't go to Jerusalem. And he said, this is what I need to do. This is where I need to go. And so he begins in verse number 1, and we're going to read down through verse 5. He said, men, brethren, and fathers, hear ye my defense, which I make now unto you. If you look back one chapter before, at the end of verse 40, chapter 21, the Bible says, when there was made a great silence, he spake unto them in the Hebrew tongue. So this was important for Paul to speak to them in a language that they understood. They needed to hear this coming from a place of a sound that they understood and they respected. And he says, men, brethren, and fathers, hear ye my defense, which I make unto you now. And when they heard that he spake in the Hebrew tongue to them, they kept the more silence. And he saith, I am verily a man which am a Jew, born in Tarsus, a city in Cilicia, yet brought up in this city at the feet of Gamaliel, and taught according. I mean, well, we didn't have worship. I just figured that's got a groove to it. I don't know what that is. Do. Okay, here we go. I'm just having too good of a time tonight. So he says, I was brought up at the feet of Gamaliel. For those who are unaware, Gamaliel, the high priest. All right. Paul is saying, I was trained in these things that you are the law that you are adhering to and what you're wanting to persecute me for. I know where this comes from. I've got experience with this. And he said, and I was taught according to the perfect manner of the law of the fathers, and was zealous toward God, as ye all are this day. And I persecuted this way unto the death, binding and delivering into prisons both men and women. He begins to tell his testimony. As also the high priest doth bear me witness, and all the estate of the elders, for whom also I received letters unto the brethren, and went to Damascus to bring them, which were there bound unto Jerusalem, for to be punished. And so Paul is building up to his conversion story. He is saying, I haven't always been this person that you dislike. If you would have met me years before, I would have sounded an awful lot like you. And so he's identifying with their, I don't want to call it prejudice, but for a lack of a better term, that's really what it is. They are hardline against this Jesus that he is preaching, and they are hardline in favor of the law of Moses. And he's saying, hey, wait a second, I know exactly where you're coming from because I used to think the same way. Okay? And so this opens with him defending his faith, and he's recounting his conversion to a very angry crowd. And his defense, he doesn't base it on intellectual arguments, but he puts in that personal testimony of how Jesus was the one that transformed his life. And so Paul's use of his personal story reminds you and I that the power of a testimony can never, ever, ever be understated. The power of a testimony for each and every one of us, we all have that conversion story. Whether you were born into this faith and you were raised up this way, or whether you came to this from another religious understanding, whatever it is, your story and your testimony about how God connected you to the truth of His Word is powerful. I feel like in today's modern society, one of the most effective tools of the enemy is to try to silence our testimony. He wants to make us feel like that our testimony is not valid, that it is not powerful, that no one will connect with it. He wants to give us all the reasons not to speak, right? You know how it is. You're in the grocery store and there's a person in line behind you, and you strike up a conversation, and you'll talk about anything under the sun. But as soon as it goes through your mind to encourage them in the Lord, or to begin to have one of those God conversations with them, all of a sudden you just start getting bombarded with, well, they don't want to hear that, and they're going to think you're strange, and that you don't want them thinking that you're weird, and on and on. Why is it that when you want to talk to somebody about the temperature outside, you don't think that's weird? I mean, think about this. Whenever I want to talk to somebody about what I had for dinner last night, or if I want to talk to Brother Bradley and Sister Cassandra about the joys of Biscoff cookie butter, y'all, when I said Biscoff and they said, what's that? I said, on your way home, you go to Food Lion. Do not leave the Food Lion parking lot unless you have a tub of Biscoff cookie butter on your way home. She said, what do you eat it with? I said, well, you start out with a spoon, but I generally end up with my finger down on the inside of it. Now, I didn't feel weird 1 minute when I was telling them that. There wasn't 1 second that went through my head of, well, they don't want to hear this. Quit being stupid. You're just a fat man telling them about how you got fat. Why you got to do all that stuff? But now, if the conversation would have been about what Jesus has done for me today, even in this room, even in this setting, the enemy starts to bombard us with those fiery darts of insecurity and inferiority, and that's what he wants to do. He wants to tear apart your testimony, because your testimony is powerful. Your testimony of how God saved you, about how he turned your life around, about the difference that he has made in your life, is the most powerful thing that has been placed into your arsenal to use. And we see Paul doing this. Does anybody want to read verses 6 through 10? Cassandra, you want to read that for me, right? No, I'm teasing. Y'all, it's an inside joke, and I already told Brother Jacob, who's carrying the mic, not to take it to you whenever I said that. Anybody want to read verses 6 through 10 for me? Brother Mears is going to read verses 6 through 10. Would you do that for me, sir? He's bringing you the microphone.
And it came to pass that as I made my journey and was come nigh unto Damascus about noon, suddenly there shone from heaven a great light round about me. And I fell unto the ground and heard a voice saying unto me, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? And I answered, Who art thou, Lord? And he said unto me, I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom thou persecutest. And they that were with me saw indeed the light, and were afraid, but they heard not the voice of him that spake to me. And I said, What shall I do, Lord? And the Lord said unto me, Arise and go unto Damascus, and there it shall be told thee of all things which are appointed for thee to do.
Thank you so much, sir. So we see the Apostle Paul begins to immediately, so he's set the he's kind of set the stage. In the first 5 verses, he sets the stage, and he says, I thought like you once. I was commissioned by the high priest to go and to persecute the people who believe the way that I now believe, to persecute them unto death. I had the authority to do it, and I was headed to Damascus to do it. But he doesn't stop there. How many times do we don't look at it as a part of our witness, a part of our testimony, but how many times are we ready to jump on the bandwagon of who we used to be? Get around the right crowd, and you begin to talk, oh, I remember when I used to do those things. Yeah, back in the day, let me tell you. You wouldn't hold a candle to me back in the day. My goodness, I could tie one on with the best of them. Back in the good old days. And we stop short of explaining what changed and why we aren't that way anymore. I love the fact that the Apostle Paul doesn't just identify with the crowd around him and say, hey, I get why you're mad. And if you'd have caught me 10 years ago, I'd have been just as mad as you are today. And he could have stopped there, but he didn't stop there. Because he began to tell them the reason for the hope that was within him. And he begins to talk about what happened to him. I was on the road to Damascus. I was going to persecute these Christians, and a light shone down from heaven. And he begins to tell them everything that happened to him that we've already read in the first 2 or 3 chapters here of the book of Acts. We begin to see everything that took place, that he called out, Lord, who are you? I'm Jesus. I'm the one that you're persecuting. And he's blinded by that light. So let me ask this. How can sharing our testimony about what God has done in our lives make an impact on those around us? Bring the mic right up here. Sister Sherry first.
Well, it's a guidebook. You're relating to people around you, especially the people that you've already known and that you used to do all those things with. Right. You're showing them that there's better. Okay. So sharing your testimony is important, but there are some whose testimony is a lot darker and filled with unspeakable things.
Right.
That's not an easy thing to share.
Certainly. I agree with that. I would ask this, and thank you for bringing that up, because let's be real here, okay? Real talk. No confusion about who we are. We're all human. I love every one of you under the sound of my voice, but there ain't none of you that's got bumps on the back where the wings were clipped off. Those are your shoulder blades, okay? That's not a halo over top of your head. I don't know what it is, but it's not a halo. It might be horns holding up the halo. I don't know. We're all human. We all have a story. Jesus said that the well are in no need of a physician. The sick are the ones who need a physician, right? So therefore, we have to realize that we all have a story that we have come from. And that testimony of what God has done for us is where the power exists. Now, here is an issue personally that I have. There's a reason why in today's church we don't do the old testimony service portion of a Sunday gathering. There's a reason why. When I was growing up, I'm just gonna be an old head here. When I was growing up, we used to, it was common for somebody to stand up. They're gonna start singing a song. When they get done singing their song, they're gonna testify. Or even to the point of putting microphones, Lord help us, Jesus. We had microphones stationed about halfway up the aisles. There's 2 or 3 of them in the church that I grew up in. And people just line up to testify. Now, it could be wonderful. It could be great about what God had done for them. And then it could be not wonderful. Then it could be just things that nobody should openly say in public like that. Okay? We have to recognize that we can identify where someone is at. And this is what Paul does. Look at Paul's pattern. Paul was the chief amongst those who were persecuting the Jews. If roles would have been reversed, if Paul would have been before his conversion, he would have been standing right there in the front with the rest of those who were ready to string him up. That's exactly what he would have done. He would have been the first one picking up stones. Okay? But Paul begins to tell them his history and his connection to them and to their belief, but Paul doesn't go through telling all the grisly details. You don't hear Paul talking about what he witnessed when they stoned Stephen. He says, hey, I've been where you are. I understand where you're coming from, and he gives them an insight to that, but he very quickly turns it and begins to put the focus on what Jesus has done for him and why he doesn't see things the way that they do anymore. I said this on Sunday, and man, there's no way I'm getting through this session tonight. I said this on Sunday, and it's very, very true. You look at the story of Lazarus, and you begin to see how people are identified. When Jesus comes up to the tomb, Martha is immediately identified as the sister of he who is dead. But previously to that, we see Mary is identified as the one who worshiped. If we're not careful, we can let what God has brought us out of still be what we identify as, even in the church. Even after deliverance and after God has set us free and after we don't have to wrestle with those things anymore, we can still allow that to be what we are called and what we call ourselves. And this is why I'm saying when it comes to our testimony, a testimony is literally a door opener. It's an opportunity for me through an issue or a situation that I have walked through, a valley that I've walked through, to be able to make a connection with somebody in the middle of their mess. It is not an opportunity for me to pull up a chair and say, man, why don't we talk about it and compare horror stories? You ever talk to somebody who's a story topper? Some of y'all know what I'm talking about. Some of you are like, what do you mean? Story topper is whenever you see somebody do something and you tell them about it, they've always seen somebody do it bigger and better and faster, right? Yeah, whew, man, we were on that. I mean, it goes to everything. We were on that plane. They said we were 35,000 feet in the air. I was on a plane once going 36,000. We got to be careful that in our testimony, we're not story toppers. Somebody's telling us what they've gone through, what the struggle has been, and we start going into, oh, that's nothing. Listen what happened to me. And that's why I'm so glad that Sister Sherry said what she did. Because there are things that there's stuff, y'all, there's stuff that I've been through in my life that ain't nobody in this room aside from my wife ever going to hear about. Because it serves no purpose for you to hear about it. Right? But whenever you're going through an issue or a struggle, the Lord has given things and situations that He's delivered me from that allow me to be able to connect with where you're at, to be able to say, I understand where you're coming from. I've walked that road. Let me tell you what He's done for me. And so that personal testimony has to be about what God has done. We don't glorify sin. We just don't. I mean, you may have been the biggest drug addict in all of Charlottesville. That may have been you. They may still recognize you down at the jail. If they were to see your face, they may still recognize you. But that don't mean that you've got to go telling everybody, oh, I was the biggest drug addict in all of Charlottesville. No. You don't got to tell them all the stuff that happened when all that stuff was going on when you were leading that life. Why? Because all that does is glorify sin. And if we're not careful, I didn't mean to get on this, but I need to get on this. If we're not careful, we will find ourselves in the position of the children of Israel looking back over the Red Sea saying we had it so much better when we were in Egypt. Thank you for those 2 amens and the rest of those crickets right there. So, when we see this, I've got to move forward. That sharing the experience of the new birth is the key part of evangelism. And just like Paul, you and I should never underestimate the power of our story to communicate the transformational authority of the grace of God. Let's go on to verse number 12. I'm gonna just jump in there. The Bible says in 1 Ananias, he's speaking again. He's telling of his story. A devout man according to the law, having a good report of all the Jews which dwelt there, came unto me and stood and said unto me, Brother Saul, receive thy sight. In the same hour I looked upon him. He said, I experienced a miracle. And he said, the God of our fathers has chosen thee that thou shouldest know his will and see that just one, and shouldest hear the voice of his mouth. For thou shalt be his witness unto all men of what thou hast seen and heard. And now, why tarriest thou? Arise and be baptized, and wash away thy sins, calling on the name of the Lord. Notice, Paul's testimony continues as he recounts not just the powerful experience that he had on the road to Damascus, but he begins to tell them there were some things that I had to be obedient to. He doesn't leave them hanging in the middle of this and just say, well, the Lord can do it for you. I hope one day that he does. God bless you. Let's all stand and be dismissed. No, he continues with his testimony, and his testimony is recounting the fact that he was baptized in the name of Jesus, and then he begins his mission to spread the gospel. So, I'm looking at this, and I am seeing a man who is in a very uncomfortable situation. If Paul were to pray, and I'm sure that Paul did pray for the Lord to give him opportunities to speak into people's lives and to share his story. Okay? Yes, he did. Don't tell me no, sir. Yes, he did. Deacon, you want the microphone, buddy? Yeah. I know. I want to go to sleep too. That's all right. I've already seen 3 or 4 people head bob, buddy. You go right ahead and go to sleep. It's all right. You ain't going to hurt pastor's feelings at all. So when we look at this, we see that they're not just livid. They getting ready to kill him. That's where this is. For what he is saying, they are ready to end his life. Now, in those situations, let's take it to today. If you were in a situation where someone is protesting against what you say, when you are sharing the gospel and the testimony of what God has done in your life, what is your response? If somebody stands up and says, I don't want to hear that, you need to shut your mouth and whatever, however colorful the language may be. They're not taking you to the point of you're gonna perish. No. Instead, but they are very insistent about they don't want to hear what you have to say. And far too frequently, we, as the people of God, we just fold up our hands and say, all right, well, I'm just going to go on. We love to take those scriptures, that we use really frequently. Jesus said not to cast your pearls before swine, so I'm just going to leave this pig pen right now. Got nothing to do with that. It's got to do with how do we respond in difficult or uncomfortable situations. Look at Paul's example. He submits to the will of God, and it should encourage us to prioritize God's purpose over our personal comfort. Just yesterday, I honestly hope that he watches this, and I hope that he sees this. There's a brother from one of our churches down in the Richmond area. I believe it's Freedom Church. I believe Brother Clements is his pastor. Brother Anthony and I were down in Richmond yesterday, and we went to a little spot. We were driving down the road, and I hadn't eaten, and he hadn't eaten, and I thought, well, I felt like Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch. Here's water. What doth hinder us? We're driving through Richmond. There's plenty of places to eat. So we pulled off at a little spot called Joey's Hot Dogs. Anybody ever been to Joey's Hot Dogs? My wife has, I know, but she just won't admit it. It's an amazing little hot dog spot if you're a hot dog guy like I am. But we go walking in, and the guy that's working behind the little flat top goes, "Hey, Brother Fitzwater, how you doing?" Now y'all know me and names, right? I said, "Hey, bro, what's up, Chief? How you doing, my friend?" I recognized him right away. His name's John. He's a fantastic young man. But I watched what I felt in that place as opposed to the last time that I was there. And I had to ask him, "How long have you been here?" Because it was so different from the last time that I was in. The spirit in that whole place was different. I'm standing there, and he's telling me about how his son just got baptized last Sunday, and his parents were there, and his brother was there, and his brother's girlfriend was there, and he starts talking, and he said, "It ain't going to be long. They're all going to be there with me." And he's just praising God right there while he's fixing hot dogs. And I look down on the counter, and there's 2 or 3 pieces of paper stapled together, and at the top of just a simple little thing, at the top of it says prayer list. Names and needs and phone numbers, and my guys, people just, there were 8 or 9 people that had just on that page. What are you saying, Pastor? I'm saying this. Making an impact in the world around us is really simple if we'll just do it. I'm sure that whenever he first started out, it was funny, we were talking, and I said, "Man, how long you been here?" He said, "Yeah, I've been here for a couple of years." And he said, "I'm making more money doing this than I ever was in corrections." And that's what he was going to do. He was a corrections officer. That's what he wanted to do with his life. I'm sure that he never saw himself looking down the road, working in a hot dog stand. But here he is. And he's using where God has planted him, and he is trying to impact lives around. And we sat there, and there was all kinds of interesting characters come walking in that place. But there wasn't nothing that walked through those doors that changed the atmosphere that he was producing, just because he was willing to let the Lord use him, even in the middle of a place that for many folks might have been an uncomfortable situation. I don't know what his coworkers thought about him putting a prayer list out the first time, but I do know this much. Folks coming through writing names on it, and it was still there when I came in. I don't know if there was any protest. I don't know if he got any kind of backlash for what he was doing there on the job. But let me tell you what, whatever it is that he's faced, he's still talking about Jesus. He's still letting folks know that your life don't have to be the way that it is. And I sat there and watched him greet people as they're coming in, and just the joy of the Lord all over his face, fixing hot dogs. Now, I don't know what your hot dog stand is, but we all got one. I don't know where it is that God has positioned you to change the atmosphere of that place. But I do know this. If you're there, if God has placed you there, then you need to start sowing into that place that he has placed you. And you need to be willing to share what God has done in your life. "Oh, Pastor, nobody wants to hear about that." Don't give me that junk. Why? Because I've watched it happen. I've watched people's lives be changed just because somebody was willing to say, "I once was lost, but now I'm found. I once was blind, but now I see. Now I am able to tell you things don't have to be the way that they've always been. Things don't have to always be this way." And that's what Paul is doing. He is doing this at the threat of death. He knows He knows which direction this could go very quickly because he's been on the other side of it. He's been the instigator before. Look what he says here in verse 22, and I'm hurrying to a close, and I'm going to give you 3 points to remember. And they gave him audience unto his word, and then lifted up their voices and said, Away with such a fellow from the earth, for it is not fit that he should live. And as they cried out and cast off their clothes and threw dust into the air, you might have made somebody mad, but you ain't ever made anybody mad enough that they start ripping their clothes off and throwing dirt at you. Get that picture. And the chief captain commanded him to be brought into the castle and bade that he should be examined by scourging. Examined by scourging. That's an interesting King James terminology right there. That means they stripped him bare and then they beat the daylights out of him, that he might know wherefore they cried so against him. They were going to make him feel what they were feeling. Despite his testimony, the crowd reacts with hostility and anger. Despite the fact that there is power in what he's saying, they react in an adverse manner, but we don't see Paul retaliate or respond in kind. We don't see Paul shake the dust off his feet. We don't see him turn around and, tell them what he thinks about them. Instead, Paul sticks to the testimony, and we have to learn to respond to adversity with grace. Let me give you 3 points here. And then I want to go to practicality. Here's 3 steps to apply Acts 22 in our own lives. Number 1, share your testimony. It's yours, and God has given it to you for a reason. I can't share your testimony because God didn't do for me what he did for you. Share your testimony. Look for opportunities to tell others what God has done in your life. Number 2, obey God's call. Even when the road you're getting ready to walk seems difficult, you've got to remain obedient to the direction that God has given to your life. Even when you may be in a situation that you feel like, you know what? I can't believe I'm here. I can't believe God's still got me stuck here. You know what? Stay obedient even in the middle of stuff that you don't understand. And number 3, always respond with grace. There will be times that you will give your testimony and they will reject you or they will respond with hostility. Our response to that must always be with love and integrity, trusting in God's plan for our lives. Now, I've got 5 minutes. What are some practical ways that you can share your testimony with others this week? Come right here, and then I'll go to the next one.
Come on over to my neighborhood. There was a drug overdose a month ago. You want to reach people? You want to pray for people? You want to have outreach? Come on over. Give me a call.
All right. Anybody else? Practical ways that you can share your testimony. Practical ways that you can share your testimony. Oh, going in the back.
Just start a conversation. Ask people how they're doing and actually listen. Ask them if they have needs to be prayed for.
Okay. Absolutely. Good. Anybody else? Anybody else? Oh, Brother Mears.
This is the best example right here.
Absolutely.
Everyone that goes through her line at the store, she is their friend. She is their neighbor.
Yeah.
She's their confidant. She's their pastor. She's their prayer warrior.
Right.
She will say, I will pray for you. They will say, pray for me. She said, I'll pray for you right now.
There you go.
And so she prays for them. And the line's backing up. But she doesn't let that faze her.
Come on.
And the job doesn't let it faze them.
Right.
And she's told me time after time after time. All these little, see all this? But all the little old people love her. And they all want to go through her line
There we go.
because she shows the love of God.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Practical ways. Anybody else? These are good. Sister Rita Lee.
For me, on a daily basis, it's just the one-on-one conversations that
Mhm.
you have with people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I work at a fitness center at UVA, so I've got the name of being the prayer warrior.
Uh-huh.
Like if they need prayer for anything, they always come to me and they be like, "Is you Rita?" "Yes, I am." "What you
Yeah.
need?" And so like a lot of them come to me when it's test time.
Oh,
or
yeah.
when they have in their finals or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always good just to stay as that vessel for God. Just
Absolutely.
let him use you in whatever way that he can.
Absolutely. Absolutely. These are good. Anybody else? Practical ways. Brother Rick. He's coming to you right now.
Thanks. I really like the example that's laid out in 22 that Paul has. And, I think like any first step, it's just relating to the person.
Right.
And what came to my mind is the active listening, like, how somebody's telling you something and you mirror, validate, label, and kind of relate to them. But with this, it was kind of a segue where Paul was kind of relaying, instead of him actively listening to them, he was, once he related and established a connection, like all that, like just
Right.
the point is to establish the connection.
Mm-hmm.
Then he was sharing where they were actively listening, whether
Right.
they knew it or not,
Right.
and being concise and just kind of segueing
Mm-hmm.
from relating to them and then sharing his testimony.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very good. Very good. If someone can't relate to you, then what value does your testimony hold for them? If they feel like that you would never you would never have anything in common with them, then what you're saying, it's very easy for them to just push that off and say, well, that applies to you, but that would never apply to me. So it's important that we relate. Here's the one thing that I love, and I'll shut it down with this because it's 8:15. Here's the one thing that I love about what Paul does. Paul says nothing about all of the missionary journeys that he's been on. Paul doesn't start talking about the miracles and the signs and wonders that he's seen. A lot of times we look at that as, oh, somehow that's my testimony. Well, I've seen blinded eyes open. I've seen deaf ears unstopped. Well, that's wonderful. I've seen dead people raised from the dead, folks raised from the dead. That's wonderful. But that's not Paul's approach. Paul's approach is personal. This is who I was. This is who I am. The difference is when I met Jesus. And honestly, that's all that matters. All of these things, Paul doesn't try to build himself up in their eyes. Paul doesn't go down this road of y'all don't even know who you're talking to. You know how many churches I've started? Do you know how many people I've seen experience the power? No. Paul keeps it concise. He relates to where they are. I've been there. I'm not there anymore. And this is the difference. And let me tell you, if Jesus hasn't made that kind of difference in your life, I encourage you to meet him. You may have been in church your whole life, and you've never had that road to Damascus kind of moment with him. But I encourage you, get in his presence. Seek him until you have that kind of a moment, until you have that kind of an experience, because that's where the testimony lies. It lies in, I once was lost, but now I'm found, and this is the reason why. Amen? Amen, amen.